was in high school, I was involved with the civil rights movement. I went to Mississippi, got arrested there, and also got arrested where I lived in New York, because at that time there were no fair housing laws, and African Americans couldn't move into certain neighborhoods just because they were African American. I saw firsthand, even when I was president of the New York State High School Student Council Association. Yeah, so there were a very small number of African American students, as I mentioned, and I was head of the student government. I met with them frequently, and they were frustrated because the university wasn't acknowledging in its curriculum the importance of the African American tradition, and also issues of slavery and what it meant, and civil rights and what it meant. There was also frustration because the deck was sort of stacked in admissions against people of color because of where they came from, the school districts they came from, the fact that they didn't have parents who had gone to Brown, or didn't have the kind of connections that were important. And there were various other frustrations. So they made a decision, which we knew about, excuse me, to stage the walkout, again, as a way to express a strong view, but also to do it in a way that was consistent with the kind of passive resistance that we at least believed in at Brown. And I should say there were some people from some militant black groups at the time who came to Brown trying to foment a more violent response, but the students here decided they didn't want to go in that direction, I think correctly. So they did walk out and went to the church, and I got a call that evening from the president of the university and the head of the Corporation Student Life Committee to talk about it, and made clear to them that we supported, and the student body at large supported, the walkout, and also made clear to them that we were organizing a petition of support, and that if they didn't take this seriously, they were going to find 3,000 students walking out, not just a handful of black students. And we did get, I think, around 3,000 signatures on a petition. We used the network we had set up for curriculum reform, for education reform, which extended to every dormitory and so on. So within a day, we got 3,000 signatures of support. And I brought that to the president and said, I suggest you negotiate and try to resolve this, because their claims are legitimate, and there's going to be a massive student support for them, and we'll exercise that support in a serious way. It was a time the injustice was great, and at a place like Brown, we had very few African American students here, very few minority students, and so we thought it very appropriate to support the idea that we needed to increase the numbers, and that meant outreach, because the way we organize our educational financing system in this country, which we still do, is that it's primarily based on local taxes. And so if you grow up in a poor area where the tax base is poor, your schools are going to be poorer. If your parents haven't been educated, you're not going to have the amenities at home that wealthier kids will have, better educated parents. And so we perpetuate a kind of underclass educationally. To their credit, the administration at the time did understand that there were real issues, and so they did undertake a negotiation with the students and resolved it in a positive way that committed, for example, to reach out into communities where black students lived, or into black high school districts, and to set up transition year programs so that if the education levels were not up to where they needed to be because of the poor schools that kids were attending, that there would be a transition curriculum to help bring them to the point where they could be successful at Brown and so on. And they did various other programs, hiring active recruiters, instituting the Third World Center, other things that got put into place that were the result of the walkout. And so again, I would credit the administration with not being obstructionist the way they were at some other schools, and that helped, I think, also.
want to hear from Horny tonight. Yeah. We want to hear from Horny tonight. We want to hear from Horny tonight. We want to get it over. We want to hear from Horny tonight. Yeah. We want to hear from Horny tonight. We want to hear from Horny tonight.
My name is Tony Afinia. I came to Brown in the fall of 1972. In 1974, I was elected to the student government, student caucus, became treasurer, and then the following year I was elected president of the student government, which at the time was the student caucus. I was a member of the coordinating committee of the student coalition, which organized a student strike just before the building takeover, and I was one of the founding members of the Latin American Students Organization, LASO, which was one of the three organizations that actually organized and conducted the takeover. In 1974, an organization called the Sankore Society, which was an organization of black faculty and staff, including deans, professional staff, and professors, was meeting with the administration to try to negotiate some I don't know what the right word is here, compliance, let's call it. They were trying to negotiate compliance with the terms that negotiated the end of the student walkout in 1968, the black student walkout. The university made commitments with respect to the hiring of black faculty and staff, with respect to financial aid, recruitment of black students, and by 1974 those commitments had not been met. So the Sankore Society in 1974, after being frustrated by their negotiations with the administration, provided some of their documents to the black students and to the broader student body. At about the same time, in the wake of the oil crisis, the Arab-Israeli War, 1973, and the Arab oil embargo, oil prices dramatically increased. Brown was facing serious budget shortfall and deficit because of the unexpected increase in oil prices. And that was used as justification for very dramatically and very quickly balancing the university's budget. And the approach that Donald Hornig, the president at the time, took was to balance the university budget by eliminating scholarships, by laying off all 75 non-tenured faculty members, which at that point meant almost all of the black and female faculty would have lost their jobs without ever being granted tenure. It meant laying off several deans, including the deans that were working most closely with black students. The ideological or the rhetorical response was to argue that the university simply could no longer afford to be generous with financial aid, could no longer afford to admit as many black and Latino and working class white students as it had been, could not afford to retain the junior faculty members who had been hired in the recent past. Students simply did not take that response seriously. Brown University, even in the 1970s, was a fabulously wealthy institution compared to almost any other university in the country. Poor relative to Harvard, but fabulously wealthy relative to any state university or community college. So the argument that Brown could not afford to hire female and minority faculty, could not afford scholarship aid for students, made no sense to students, and we simply didn't believe it. The Third World Coalition organized a little bit differently in the final weeks of the Student Coalition leading up to and then just after the student strike. The Third World Coalition actually went out, sent teams of students out to every single black student at Brown to sit in their rooms and talk to them as long as it took to explain the issues and to convince them that it had to be done, that some kind of strong militant action needed to be taken. Or those students who were at Brown in 1975, those black and Latino students, might very well have been the last black and Latino students at Brown for many years. So several days after the corporation and the administration refused all of the demands of the student coalition, several hundred Third World students primarily took over University Hall very early in the morning of April 24th or April 25th. Again, it was a cold, kind of rainy, foggy morning, and 400 black students and 10 or 15 Latino students all converged on University Hall from staging areas at Churchill House and Arnold Lounge, where they'd been all night long waiting for the doors to University Hall to be opened. Once the call went out from the second floor of Font's house, which was my office, There was a student in my office waiting for the secretary, the president's secretary, to unlock University Hall. Once the call went out to Arnold and Churchill House that the building was open, several hundred students quietly walked across campus, surrounded University Hall, and 30 or so students went inside, asked the secretary to leave, and then barricaded the doors and announced that they had occupied the administration building and would stay in University Hall until the university agreed to all of the demands. It might help to understand that there were 30 or so students inside the building. There were 400 or so black students and Latino and Asian American students just outside the building, and another 700 or 800 white students outside them. So in order for the university administration to actually retake University Hall, they would have had to wade through over 1,000 students who were there all the time, 24 hours a day, blocking access to the building. Every single black member of the basketball and football teams wore the security right at the doors of University Hall, wearing red armbands and standing with their arms crossed, blocking access. So in order for the university to call in the police, the state police or the city police, to try to remove the students from the building, they would have had to physically remove several hundred students, including the core of the basketball and football teams. That simply wasn't possible. So the administration had to negotiate. They had no choice. Almost everyone involved, even students who didn't agree with all of the demands or all of the specific tactics of the student coalition, virtually every student at Brown at the time was absolutely certain that the students had the best interests of the university at heart, and in some ways had a clearer and more promising vision for the university than the administration did. Students didn't need a 5-year plan or a capital plan or a fundraising plan to know that Brown could only be a leading university in the late 20th century if Brown represented the communities of color in the United States, if Brown was a diverse and inclusive institution. So the context was one of mass mobilization all across the country. Shortly after the takeover, many black community activists from the city of Providence came to Brown to offer their support. Latino students from Rhode Island College came over during the nights of the takeover. Several of my friends from Rhode Island College came and played conga drums all night long, so that all over the east side you could hear the drumming 24 hours a day.
All day, all night, whatever we do, we got to do it right. All day, all night, whatever we do, we're gonna do it right. All day.
The outcome was that just a day or two later, the university negotiated with the student negotiating team that had been sent. They were meeting in the Graduate Center, and the dean of the faculty, the vice president for finance administration, the provost, were negotiating with a student negotiating team, and they agreed to essentially all of the student demands. And Brown has never been the same since. Meetings were held in every dormitory on campus. Flyers and information sheets were put under every single door. The coordinating committee, which consisted of about 50 students, met every single night at midnight. Sometimes those meetings went on for 2 or 3 hours. Those were collective planning meetings, and it was clear at the end of each of those meetings that the decisions that were taken had the consensus support, or a strong majority support, of all the students who were represented.
And certainly what I learned at Brown was important, and that is that being thorough and being well organized and gaining strength in large numbers is all very important, and doing a lot of very careful planning so that you can defend what you're doing and you've thought it through. If you have large numbers of students behind you, your voice will be heard. It has to be heard. If you're just a small group, then you can be ignored. So, and it's all about organizing, and I don't believe it's a question of different times or different, conditions. I think it's a question of doing the very hard work of discussion, persuasion, building an organization, and getting large numbers of students behind something. I think the administration you have now is a good one. I think they will listen, but I think what they're going to want to hear is this just you, or is this just you and a couple of your friends, or does this really represent a broad-based student opinion? And if it does, I think you'll have success.
And in all three of those events, the takeover of the walkout of '68, the organizing for the new curriculum in 1970, '69 and '70, and then the takeover, the strike and the takeover, the one element that was common to all three of those was an insistence that every single student needed to be part of the discussion. Now, not every single student came out on the green, but it's been a long time since Brown has had 3,000 students on the green at a protest. That's what happens when every single student is talked to, when every student is made part of the discussion, when every student has information and can talk to one another about what the issues are and what the response should be. Don't be complacent. Don't be satisfied with sending out tweets to several hundred people. Don't be satisfied with hanging flyers or hanging posters. You need to make an effort to reach 5,000 or 6,000 people one-on-one in their rooms, in the dormitories, in the lounges, in the fitness centers, at the swimming pool, in the dining halls. If you really want to change Brown, you need to get every student involved. Not every student will be participatory. Not every student will be part of the movement. But if every student has been touched, if every student has been reached out to in some way, then that provides a base of support which nobody else can duplicate. The faculty cannot do that. The administration cannot do that. Nobody can do that.
Well, whenever you start a major movement to bring change, you can never be fully confident it's going to be successful. But if you believe in what you're doing, then you move forward. And I've always believed in my life that you want to try to do major things that have a major impact. And sometimes that means you'll fail. But when you do succeed, it's a significant success.
And I don't think I'm the only person who would argue that Brown is what it is today because the students were very firm in 1975, refused to accept the university's no for an answer, and took the kind of action which was very consistent with what had been happening all over the country. Students come to Brown thinking that this is the best possible university for them, and in fact they may be right, but that doesn't mean Brown couldn't be better. So it takes time for students to overcome their illusions and their expectations for Brown and realize that Brown really needs reform, Brown needs to be improved. Sometimes it takes other students talking to them. Some students see very clearly Brown's problems and Brown's challenges. Other students haven't come to that place yet. So when students are organizing, the most important task, the central most important task of the student organizers is to reach out to everyone and make sure that everyone is involved and everyone has an opportunity to learn and engage in a dialogue and come to their own conclusions about how Brown could be a better place.
In periods of history where great positive change has taken place, going back thousands of years if you study history, students play an active role. And I think that was certainly true during my youth, and I think it would be good for students to take the issues they really care about and become more active in promoting those issues.
So in many ways, students are the only people in the Brown community who can act honestly and in a very principled way and can keep Brown honest and can, as I said, serve as something of a conscience for Brown. Well, sometimes that means activism. Sometimes that means doing things that make the administration uncomfortable in the short run. But in the long run, even administrators who were at Brown in the 70s and 80s, looking back on the way Brown has developed since then, acknowledge that it was that very activism that made Brown the kind of place it is today, that makes Brown as attractive as it is to the kinds of students who still come here. So the easiest answer to your question is I believe that as long as Brown continues to sell itself and advertise itself as a place where innovative, creative, thoughtful, self-directed people will flourish, then Brown will face continued student activism. And I believe students at Brown will always adapt their activism. They will always adapt their tactics and their strategies to the moment. They will always adapt to whatever the technology and the national culture and the national political environment allows. I don't think Brown students will ever stop figuring out how to make Brown be a better place?
I would say student activism today is a bit dormant compared to what I would think it should be, given the issues that are confronting the country and the world right now. So my main advice is pursue your beliefs, pursue your values, organize, be idealistic and practical at the same time, and go for it. Make positive change. You're at a time of your life where you can do it.